Okay, hello everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Today I am interviewing Joanna Vatsis, who has been a social worker for how many years?
Since 1974.
If you can go ahead and start out by telling my class about the jobs you have worked in throughout your social work career.
Originally, I was hired at Child Protective Services in 1974. In 1974, I was part of the Own Homes program. I worked in South Dallas, which meant I worked on a lot of project housing. From there, I went to investigator with Child Protective Services, and I investigated reports of child abuse and neglect. In 1976, I was chosen by my supervisor to be trained to work with sexual abuse. I told her I had no desire to do, and I told her I was not going to the training and she needed to find someone else, and so I had to go to the training. And ever since then, I have worked with child sexual abuse. It became my specialty during my years of investigation. Nobody wanted to investigate it. They just thought it was terrible, and so that became my claim to fame. In fact, at that time, I received a letter from one of my program directors that said I was one of the top 3 investigators of child sexual abuse in Dallas. When I was hired by the juvenile department as the supervisor for a non-existent unit, which was the intake unit at Lee Tot Center. Lee Tot Center takes runaways from the police. They were Class C misdemeanors, so they couldn't be taken in by the juvenile department. The intake unit was started by myself. I have 5 workers. We had to work 24 hours a day. I was on call 24 hours a day. And my unit grew from those 5 workers to a complete staff. So it went from about 5 workers to about 15 workers. Stayed there for 11 years. And again, the specialty was child sexual abuse. After that, there was a grant. It was called Spotlight. And Spotlight worked with police, adult probation, and juvenile probation. We would see our clients 5 times a week. That also proved to be somewhat crisis intervention. People that we took in that unit were gang members, felony drug users. During the time I was working at the juvenile department, I was also doing counseling with convicted sex offenders. At Child Protective Services, I did every group from the 5-year-old victims to the 17-year-old victims, and from there I moved on to the offenders. And that's who I've worked with ever since. The ones I work with now are currently on probation. They're court ordered into a program. My specialty is working with the developmentally delayed offenders and female offenders. Every job with Child Protective Services had to do with crisis intervention. That's what you do. You're constantly putting out fires. With intake, it was spelled out because you would get a call. Your supervisor would decide if it was a priority or 1 or 2. So we would have to go out if there was a report of abuse and investigate it. Usually the families that reported were in crisis, or if someone else reported it. The family was definitely in crisis when the abuse happened. In Project Spotlight, we dealt with crisis intervention. Even though that was a probation job, it was dysfunctional families who are constantly in crisis. Bring them into the office and calm a situation down that was getting ready to explode. Every job in Child Protective Services, because even if you're working with a family and you're managing a caseload, it's constantly putting fires out, and it just never stops. Those families a lot of times are always in crisis, and you're the one that they call and you're the one that they depend on. So I'm a group facilitator, but I spend a whole lot of time checking out resources for people. My coworkers come to me when they need resources for their clients, because that's what I've done for most of my career, is have some kind of knowledge of the other resources that are available in Dallas. Someone may be battering his wife, and the wife has told the counselor, and so we want to make sure that she has the appropriate services, so she would be referred to the family place.
Another example of crisis intervention almost,
Right.
What ways in particular do you go about bringing these sex offenders out of crisis?
Well, it depends. Some are not taking their medication and they're in crisis. Some are violating the conditions of their probation and they're in crisis. Some are having a family emergency and they're in crisis. So it depends. But most of the time, they are reminded that they're on probation and they have to be accountable. Accountability is the bottom line. I have several homeless clients who really have a very difficult time managing themselves and managing their lives. I will call the probation officer, let them know what's happening so that we can band together as a team to help lift that person up and encourage them to do the right thing. I also use the group as a tool when someone's in crisis to lift that person up and encourage them to do the right thing. And I would have to say, so far, so good. I would have to say there are probably more successes than there are failures.
Working with kids, working with groups, working with classes, working with communities. What is the main quality or skill that a social worker has to have whenever they work in this particular field?
I would say it's compassion for other human beings. I have never had the luxury of declining a client. In my current position, I've had people come into my office who are extremely angry, screaming and yelling, and my response is to calm them down. I attribute everything to the training I got at Child Protective Services. It is a thankless job, but it is well worth the training.
So, I mean, needless to say, the population that you work with is very diverse.
Extremely diverse. I work with people that are homeless. I have people, one woman in my women's group, she has a 3-figure salary. Some of the women in there are barely scraping by. It's Black, white, Hispanic.
Men, children.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I do see children in my practice, but I have to see them when there is no adult present. So I have to go in on a special day to see them. So I have worked with and do work with now men, women, children, people with special needs, whatever those special needs are, whether it's because they are not able to speak English, they're illiterate. I have a gentleman who's blind and who also is an amputee. I've had other clients that were deaf and had to deal with them in a group setting. So it's been quite challenging, and I have to be very creative in the work that I do so that I can help them. This is probably a social justice issue. I had a woman that I worked with that in a very rough part of town. She was a former prostitute, and the referral talked about having rats in her home, and she had 5 male children. So the first day I went over there, I told her, I've never seen a rat. I don't intend on seeing a rat. You need to clean this house. But as I worked with her, she finally found a job. Now remember, she doesn't have insurance because she's almost practically illiterate, but she found a job. She was scrubbing floors at the county hospital. So she was able to rent furniture for her apartment. She was able to purchase things, and then the worst happened. She got ill. Of course, they cut off her check. They cut off her food stamps because she was making money. She became ill, had to turn in all the furniture. She had no resources. She had to go through the process all over again of applying. And to me, it opened my eyes to exactly what's lacking in our government. Instead of helping people help themselves, it almost encourages them to be dependent on the system. And I see that as a horrible injustice. I think for years the literature has said that the best way to work with sex offenders is cognitive behavioral work, which is what we do. That is our stress. On the other hand, more recently from ATSA, which is the Association for the Treatment of Sexual, can't think, sexual
Offenders?
addicts, I think. Anyway, basically they're saying that they want things to be less confrontational, more supportive, more encouraging, and I personally do not see that that works. I have one group that is just fabulous, and out of that group, probably 5 people have completed their treatment and moved on. But it's because of the cognitive behavioral approach. When they come in, they're angry. They're lying about the offense. They're lying about what they did to the child. And you all have to remember, I started at Child Protective Services. I've interviewed thousands of children. And because all of those stories are embedded in my soul, I know when someone's being dishonest. So it is my job to hold them accountable. I don't think patting them on the hand is going to lead them to accountability. And I've yet to see that happen.
Is there anything that you would like to tell my class?
I have loved it. I have loved it. I would never, ever, ever want to do anything else but this. It was always one thing leading to another. I see that as a God thing. I see working with sex offenders as a God thing. Because it disturbed me greatly that children were being abused. And I thought, well, the only way to stop it is to stop the people who abuse them. I find it very fulfilling. I would want to cry sometimes when I interviewed the kids. But they kind of just knew where I was coming from. Years ago, I went out on a call. They said it was a bruise on the baby's face. So I'm thinking, oh, bruise, bone, baby's fine. I go out to the seedy motel, I knock on the door, and the minute the mother opens the door, I get the creeps. The creeps. Back of the room is this man. He has one eye and he's staring at me. And I'm thinking, oh my God. That was before police went out with us. That was before anything. I said, I need to see this child. So Mom brings her out in panties. One leg is swollen twice the size of the other. There's blood all over her hands. There's blood on her gums. And I am horrified. So I tell the mom, I need something to put over her. I need a smock or something. And this was before cell phones. And you're supposed to call your supervisor before you remove a child. The only phone in the room was next to the guy with the one eye. I was not using that phone. But if I took the mother with me, it wasn't a removal. The minute I picked that baby up, she was like 3 years old. She grabbed the back of my shirt like, get me out of here. She somehow knew that I had sense. Somehow. And almost every child I ever interviewed was like that. They just trusted me. I walked in the room and they told me. They trusted me. How that happens, I can't tell you. I've always thought it was a God thing. So that day, I took the child and the mother and the baby, and therefore it didn't count as a removal because I had the mother with me. That mother never touched that child. She never tried to comfort her. That little girl was squinched over next to me in the car as close as she could get. We got her to the shelter where I worked out of. The boss called an ambulance. When the doctors saw her, they were crying. The nurses were crying. The detectives were crying. It was horrific. And that mother never flinched. But remember, when I picked her up, she knew. She grabbed my blouse like, get me out of here.